All right, we'll get started here. Again, welcome everybody. I'm really excited for this webinar today. This is our 98th that we've had over the years. I am Dave Lundahl. I'm the founder and CEO for Insights Now. And I've been working in the consumer insights industry now for about 40 years. And I'm just absolutely passionate about how to apply insights to create a healthier, happier, more sustainable world. I believe innovations such as what GLP-1 drugs bring hold huge opportunities for achieving these types of goals. And so this topic is obviously very, very relevant. We have a record number of registrants connecting in today. And so I'm really looking forward to this whole conversation. So I am going to do some introductions here. I have with me Sarah Hayes, Roberto Salas, Sarah Hillegas, and with myself. And I'm going to let each of them, Anna, we'll start with you. Do a brief introduction to yourself. Anna's assistant professor at Oregon State University in Food Science Department.
Yeah, hello everyone, and I'm happy to be here today. As Dave mentioned, my name is Anna Hayes, and I recently started a couple months ago as an assistant professor at Oregon State University in the Department of Food Science and Technology. My background is in food science and a bit in nutrition, but also did a postdoc in more behavioral neuroscience and biological sciences. So I'm excited to be here today to be talking about things that relate to the control of food intake. So thank you.
Great. Roberto.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm so glad to be here and together with all these group of people, very, very passionate about understanding how people behave, especially in this topic, which is actually this quite disruptive. And I've been working for IFI for the last 15 years or so. I'm originally from Mexico, but I'm right now together with a group of people here in IFF leading the global consumer intelligence group. So happy to be here, and then ready to talk about the topic. It's a very interesting one.
Fantastic. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Hillegas. I'm a Consumer Insights and Marketing Manager at 113 Industries, and I'm so excited as well just to share on GLP-1. I've been studying the topic for a little over 2 years, and it's great to hear that I'm not alone, and there's so many other people that have an interest in this topic. So thank you all for joining us today.
Fantastic. So a little bit of housekeeping here. We're going to have at the very end a time for question and answers. So everybody should see a place where you can post your Q&A, your questions, I should, for that discussion at the end. So you can put that in at any time. All us, this panelists will see those questions. We can prepare, and then we'll take them one at a time from first to last as they come in. There's also a chat area. And so if you have any general comments or anything you want to do in sharing your thoughts today, you can post it that, and everybody will get to see the chat as well. And then if you have any technical issues, anything, you can use the chat to the host specifically, and we'll try to take care of you specifically on the side with whatever technical issues you may have. Okay, and with that, we are going to get started into the topics today. We're going to actually go through 3 questions today. So the first is, what does this, there's some research tell us about consumer behavior during and after GLP-1 use? The second topic area is, what are the food and beverage product experiences that consumers while they're taking GLP-1 drugs? And then the last will be, what does the science tell us about GLP-1 and how it changes why people experience what they're experiencing, and what are we learning about the behavioral changes that occur while people are considering using and post use. So with that, let's get into topic number 1. And topic number 1 really starts with some research that Insights Now did. In fact, we shared some of this research at our webinar last month. And I know some of you here attended that, but for those of you that did not, we were speaking about some quality scale research that we conducted. And it was delving into the health and wellness concerns for foods and beverages among U.S. primary shoppers. And in that research per se, we had 1,000 surveyed people across the US, and we asked them 5 key open-ended questions about their concerns and the behaviors, the motives for why they were doing what they're doing, and their aspirations. And we used AI-assisted approach for text processing and classification. We had identified 3 segments of primary shoppers, and we asked them also about their usage and interest in using GLP-1 drugs, and that's what I want to share with you here today. And so, what we discovered was that GLP-1 is really should be thought about as a journey. And so consumers, we found that 82% or so that are not considering and of course not taking GLP-1 drugs, but almost 10% said they're not currently using, but they're considering it. They'd heard about it. So they have some interest. We found that 7.7% of our sample were actually currently taking GLP-1 drugs, and then another almost 5% said, yes, I've taken it, but I'm not currently. And so we figured that these people were snapshots along these 4 steps of a journey, and it will tell us a little bit about what's going on in people's lives towards creating some value that these GLP-1 drugs offer. And so what we discovered further in we looked at people that were in some part of this journey across 3 segments, and we were looking at how well these different groups indexed across what we discovered were 3 segments of people based on their food, health, and wellness concerns. And those segments are, first of all, there was a group that we call them, they were very concerned with sugar, sweeteners, carbohydrates, weight gain, okay? And we call these nutritional label readers. That's about 32% of the US primary shoppers. Then there was a second group, and we call these natural nutrition seekers, about 34%. And they're very interested in looking at products and using products that are natural, organic. They want to minimize their use of highly processed foods and so on. Fresh and clean, price value are also important things. And then there's another group basically is all about minimally processed seekers, about 26%. Now, for GLP-1, those that are currently taking, they indexed very highly on the nutritional label readers, which makes a lot of sense because the reasons you consider taking GLP-1 drugs is that it has these benefits of taking away your desire for sweeteners and carbohydrates and things so that you can achieve, for instance, a goal of weight loss. And so that's really interesting. 55% were highly concerned about sugar intake at that point. Now, if the next thing we discovered is that those that said yes, but I've taken GLP-1 drugs, but I'm no longer taking, they index almost 50% very highly on this natural nutrition seekers. And that's where, taking natural organic, and the index really high on that. Also, minimally processed, avoiding highly processed foods, index pretty highly on that compared to the other groups. So this is like a start. It was a snapshot, and just thinking about this journey that consumers go through when they're considering and they're taking, and then there's post sort of use and how they change their concerns. Okay, now the second thing we saw, to sort of further backing up this sort of the diet changes that these consumers are seeking, when they're on some part of this journey changes. And we found that that those that are no longer taking GLP-1s, that means they've switched off of them, they shift to eating less sugar and more vegetables and having less focus on reducing carbs and losing weight, which makes a lot of sense. So my question to the panel here is what does this tell us about the consumer journey associated with considering to using and then no longer taking GLP-1 drugs, okay, to achieve some behavioral goals? So thoughts,
Well,
Roberto,
yeah,
what do you think?
yeah. So what we have found in some of the studies that we have run is that, like you say, it's a journey, right? So people are redefining their relationship with food intake. In this process, I mean, comes from different like ways. One is they have actually a reaction to some foodstuffs, which makes them
Mm-hmm.
change. But also, a lot of them are guided by doctors, which also they recommend, the intake of certain ingredients, or the reduced intake of certain other ingredients. So that journey is actually a learning process. And then the end is
Mm,
very, 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 very logical, and it makes total sense that people already went through that journey. They learn, how to eat healthier. And we have some data that people are now more mindful. They don't really follow like specific diet, but they're more
mm-hmm.
mindful in the way they eat.
Yeah. It's interesting. Stephanie just posted, sounds like they're embracing more of a lifestyle change after
Totally.
use. And it sounds, yeah, that seems very clear. Any other comments? Sarah, do you have any thoughts on this? Or
Yeah, I'm so excited to see these results because the survey work that your team has done really lines up with a lot of the work that we've done using voice of consumer data, especially when I'm seeing more vegetables, healthier foods. We also saw a lot of people prioritizing fruits as well, but raising
mm,
some cautions about the sugar levels in fruits, less sugar. All of the things that you have here on your chart are repeated themes that I've seen over the course of several years. So I love seeing that congruence between these different data sources that we all have access to.
great. Anna, any comments on this?
Oh, yes. I do think that this is really neat data to see as well, because it does fit the same like line of thinking and evidence that has been
Mm-hmm.
shown both through scientific literature, but also through these kinds of survey type of studies.
Mm,
That, yeah, it seems like people are embracing maybe a different kind of lifestyle and altering their dietary habits in response to these medications. Now, one thing that I think is really an interesting point to think about is those who take these GLP-1 drugs, they likely lose weight. And so what is the effect of like having lost the weight on their changed eating behavior, and, that sustaining reduction in
mm,
food weight or in body weight, and then like whether or not there might be, some weight that gets gained back again. But I think overall,
yeah.
this evidence does support this notion of alterations in how we're thinking about food intake as also behaviors that are being adapted.
Right. And I see John asked a question about protein to minimize muscle mass loss. Really good point. And I see Sarah's comment back. So I think this is a really good starting point to think about, this journey that these consumers are on, and how it evolves, and eventually it is a complete change of behavior towards a lifestyle, because you've gone through this process and then coming out the other end, then what? You're
Yeah.
not going to be taking these drugs for your whole life, hopefully not, but at some point, you want to be off them and to be a new normal, better self at some point. So that's really cool. So let's move to the second topic, because I think it's so important to get into thinking about what are these product experiences when people are taking GLP-1 drugs. And Sarah, let's start with you. You have some research based on the voice of the consumer to share.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm excited to share today. And before I get into some of the results that we'll be sharing, I just want to explain really briefly what you're going to be looking at. So at 113 Industries, we have been tracking GLP patient experiences across online conversations since 2022. And when I say that, what I mean is that we access data sets from any publicly available online source, and then we use that data for custom AI modeling. For
Mm,
today, we've pulled a sample of about 6,000 posts that were not only focused on people discussing any kind of GLP-1 medication, but also has a food and beverage layer on top of it. So it's really specific to our goal today to look at these changes that consumers and patients are experiencing if they're taking these medications. And these are the most up-to-date numbers that we could provide for today over the course of the past 6 months. So this is fresh data that we're going to be looking at on the following slides.
okay. All right. Let's move on then.
So what you're seeing here is the results from those 6,000 posts run through our AI models for sensory experiences. So the first piece of that is pulling out any mention of any food or beverage across this entire data set. And that's what the chart on the very left-hand side in the aqua blue color is showing us. It's simply showing us the top number of mentions for foods and beverages among this very select data set of 6,000 posts. And then we're seeing what the taste, flavor, and descriptors are in relationship to those foods and beverages. What I'm calling out here today, even though there's so many directions we could go in from this data alone, are that the top three entities are actually all beverages. And
Yeah.
that's really
So interesting.
fascinating. Yeah.
So interesting.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
And
I'm sorry. I'm just,
oh no, hop in at any point. As soon as I saw this, I just was pretty wowed and I wanted to dig in further because it shows that there's a even more heightened shift in liquid consumption versus food consumption. And when I dug into that more, there's this whole balance that these consumers are trying to make between their overall reduced quantity of liquids and food. And they're trying to
mm,
figure out what's the right balance for me, especially when it comes to water. So, water is number one. And I thought, why is water number one? Well, the reason for that is some people are being recommended to drink more water from their providers. Like Roberto had mentioned, they're getting a lot of feedback, but actually that's like disruptive to some of their goals. It makes people feel sick sometimes if they overindulge in liquids or if they're drinking too much water, they feel like they can't enjoy some other liquids that they
mm,
normally enjoy. So there's a whole host of things that we could get into with just water alone, but in general, we see that this shift is impacting liquids even more than it is foods. Uh,
mm,
the next takeaway is that sweet was by far the most frequently mentioned taste experience, but most often those references were not positive. People say things taste too sweet, sickeningly sweet, or disgusting
Yeah.
when it comes to foods they used to enjoy that are sweet, like desserts. And then lastly, we see a lot of other descriptors that suggest that GLP-1 consumers have a reduced tolerance for intense flavors in food.
mm.
So, like we're seeing it at the top, spicy versus bland, bitter, those types of taste descriptors that are telling us that it might be harder for this specific group of people to have really intensely flavored food experiences.
Oh,
Yes,
really?
we have found pretty much the same type of information that people are, and sometimes I got some person asking if it was the same as with COVID, and it was actually the opposite. People are really perceiving enhance perception of certain things, spiciness, sugar, saltiness even. So yeah, it's important that this group is very unique. So things that might work for weight management that are already out there might not be targeting in the right way this new group of people. So it's really important to understand where this consumer is coming from, what type of taste changes they have had in the journey, and address them in the best possible way. So coffee is the other one that I was very sad to see, because a lot of people were actually dropping their coffee intake, as I'm very coffee drinker myself. So yeah, this is very interesting.
That's quite a behavioral change
It
for
is.
coffee
It is.
drinkers. I get, so maybe there's something that can be done, to help, alleviate that, those negatives with coffee. Who knows? Maybe it's an opportunity for product developers in the coffee experience to create a coffee product designed specifically for GLP-1 users. I mean, it'd be a huge opportunity if that's is to address this concern, this tension that I'm sure coffee drinkers must feel.
Yeah. Yeah. And sweetness is something that perhaps also we are looking at more closely, because at some point there's also this belief that sweetness is totally rejected, but I think it's also a journey where people actually find the right spot, the sweet spot in terms of sweetness. But so it's also important to see that the journey starts very high at the beginning, like with a lot of secondary effects on side effects and so on. But once a consumer finds their right dosage, the right level of nutrition, then a lot of things starts to balance. And I think that's an important spot to catch the consumer into what are they looking for.
Yeah. Sarah, someone named Sarah said, do you believe it is the intense flavor of the coffee or the avoiding the caffeine, which is a really good question.
So in our data, we've seen actually really mixed response to coffee. And in a couple slides, we can actually dig into coffee a little more deeply. So
Okay.
do see users still having a strong desire to continue drinking coffee.
Okay. Should we move on to the next slide just to get to that question?
Yeah, you know what? We can definitely move on, and I'll address
All
that
right.
on my third slide, that we can dive in a little more deeply to that specifically.
Okay.
Okay. So what everyone's seeing on this screen is a new set of models, which is running 28 emotions towards foods and beverages. So I'm sure a lot of the people that are in this room today are familiar with traditional sentiment analysis that's run through a wide variety of different platforms like social listening platforms. That's not exactly what we do here at 113. We actually have a custom set of 28 emotions that individually assess the emotion throughout every line of text within a post, not a post as an entire grouping. So we run emotion towards each one of these foods and beverages that were extracted individually. What you see here in the middle is the summary of all 28 emotions in the entire data set. And if we're just looking at that, what's interesting right away is that appreciation is the highest, and it's by far the highest of all of the emotions. And when I dug into that, what I was seeing and what I've seen over time is that these medications actually help consumers improve their relationship with food and beverage. And they're actually able to have a more positive relationship with their consumption patterns because it quiets that food noise that they've had in their mind for years. And it also allows people to indulge but not binge. And that's something that they've been hoping for a long time, that these medications solve, and it actually gives them more of an appreciation towards their own behaviors and consumption patterns. And then if we look a little more closely and we actually see the breakdown of emotion, positive, negative, and ambiguous. So we're not using a neutral category, we're actually using an ambiguous category in the yellow that represents things like curiosity and some other emotional elements. We actually see unique responses to each individual food entity. So, one of the things that we see is that whole foods are the most strongly associated with appreciation.
Mm,
Really relates to the slides you shared earlier, Dave, with vegetables, right? We
mm-hmm,
saw fruits at the top of that as far as
mm,
appreciation, and also yogurt was really
mm,
high up there. So I found that to be really interesting. And then in contrast, those really highly processed items show a disproportionately negative emotional response.
mm-hmm.
And when I say that, what I'm talking about are things like alcohol, soda, and sugar. Um,
Yeah.
and when we're looking at this, I just want to let everyone know that these terms haven't been categorized or bucketed in any way for this particular presentation. So when we say alcohol or soda, that's someone actually using that term or phrase within a post itself. But if we were actually bucketing and categorizing, alcohol and soda would be even higher because we see even more negativity towards individual alcohols and soda, like Diet Coke, tequila is mentioned directly, beer, wine, those also all have this negative skew. So I'm picturing if we lump those together, we would see some of those more highly processed, especially beverages, rise up even higher.
Yeah, and also correlates, and this is really interesting, Sarah, because it really correlates with the research about people change in behavior in terms of alcohol consumption. And I think it's something that Anna can explain a little bit the reason why. But a lot of these cravings and behaviors of people wanting something that they really crave in the past has changed completely. And alcohol is one of those um, things that people are looking elsewhere and reducing their intake. So really, really interesting what you just mentioned.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Should we move on to the next slide, Sarah?
I'm ready to go.
Great. I mean, some really good comments back and forth in the chat are going on, which I think are great. I wish we had more time. So go ahead.
And on this last slide that I'll share today, this is where we can really look at the behaviors related to coffee that we were starting to talk about. So we don't just look at the emotional range, we also apply a layer of AI modeling to see behaviors as far as what are consumers seeking, limiting, or avoiding. And while there might be an overlap, of course, between some of the emotional responses in this work, it actually shows us a little more nuance that I think is extremely interesting, especially when it comes to the limiting behaviors. So, what we see here for coffee is actually that most of the consumers are seeking coffee still. They do have mixed experiences, especially when it comes to caffeine. So,
Hmm.
over and over again, I've seen this issue of decaf versus caffeine, and it has an extremely different impact on different users in this space. At least for now, I haven't seen this conclusive response to caffeine. It's pretty split down the middle. Some people can't handle it anymore, and some people aren't having a problem with it at all. They're able to continue on business as usual. So I think, Dave, you hit the nail on the head. This could be an excellent innovation opportunity because these consumers still really want to be able to enjoy their coffee, but some of them simply aren't able to anymore because of
Yeah. All the coffee suppliers out there, all the companies that have various products in the market, it could be one of several, I think, fantastic opportunities for the industry. So that's really good. And it's really interesting about your the junk food sort of pizza, fast food, these sort of comments. What do you anything further you want to say about those types of behaviors?
All I can say is, when we look at this on this nuance level, consumers aren't always just trying to get more or completely eliminate. There's this middle ground, like for alcohol and sugar or like sweet treats, they're just trying to limit. They're not trying to eliminate, they're trying to limit or reduce total quantity. But they are trying to almost completely avoid what people call junk food, which is obviously a big bucket that could include a lot of different foods, pizzas and fast foods. And it directly aligns with what you've shared, that there's this push against highly processed foods in general. So this is everything that I have to share for you guys today. Like,
Yeah,
just kind of
really, really
surface.
fascinating. I mean, for me, I'm sure all of us here, it creates other questions. Why? As a researcher, why? And so to get to the understanding of why, I think we need to move on to our third question of the day, is that what does the science tell us, about these whys? Why these changes in behaviors? Why these experiences? Okay. What is it about limiting quote unquote junk food or highly processed food? Is that psychological, or is it actually a physiological thing? So Anna, as
Yeah.
our as a university professor with all the really fascinating mix of experience, especially in neuro, which is so relevant to this topic. So what can you tell us?
Yeah, thank you for advancing the slide. So I just have a couple slides to share here, but I wanted to start off with this notion of, when we think about the control of food intake, there's actually kind of two different ways that it is being controlled. And one is through homeostatic drivers of food intake. So it's like that general need to meet energy requirements
Mm,
to sustain normal function. But then there's also the hedonic drive, which is more of the pleasure and enjoyment that goes with food. And yes, there's a lot of overlap in our physiology and in our brain that, because really, like, we need to eat because otherwise things would be really bad. So there's a lot of
yeah.
redundancies and overlap in these systems. And it's fascinating, but it also makes it pretty difficult to really understand what's going on all the time.
Mm,
But I think that what could be happening with these GLP-1 drugs is they may be altering some of the balance that is otherwise there between hedonic versus homeostatic control of food intake. And so I just wanted to show briefly a snapshot of one study that was recently published that was related to one of these GLP-1 drugs called semaglutide, where they were studying individuals in a clinical setting that were taking a higher dose of this drug over time, and found that this was leading to improved craving control, reduced cravings for savory and sweet, and
mm,
ultimately improved control of food intake that was manifested by a reduction in body weight. And that, I think, just really um, it just expands upon and adds to what we've already heard about today in relation to the experiences that users are having when they have the GLP-1 drugs and are eating, and just their behaviors related to food. But yet this also doesn't really tell us the why of what's going on. It's more of an observation of,
mm-hmm,
okay, they take these drugs and then uh, we see that there's improved cravings control. And this is mostly through a subjective ratings.
mm,
Um, but we can advance to the next slide, and I can speak a little bit more on why I think what could be going on in relation to these GLP-1 drugs. So these GLP-1 drugs, kind of how they work is our body also produces GLP-1, and in a normal setting in our body, it's actually broken down quite quickly, so it's not able to have a prolonged function. But normally what it does is it leads to feelings of satiety, so feelings of fullness and reduction in gastric emptying rate, or how quickly foods are emptying from the stomach. And as a result of that, that ultimately, helps to prevent eating, continued eating. But the way that these drugs work is they are specifically made so they don't break down as quickly. And so that's why even now I think some of them only need to be taken once a week to be able to have this effect. So they are able to evade some of the normal degradation systems that our body has to have prolonged effects. Now, an interesting notion about that is that, and I think the literature is still a little bit unclear, is whether or not these drugs can pass through the blood-brain barrier, because there are receptors for GLP-1 throughout our body, and we don't fully understand what all of those receptors, the function of them is in these different parts of the body. But it's also produced in our brains as well, and that's where there's some really interesting connections between central nervous system, GLP-1, and peripheral GLP-1, and like what is happening with that. But with all of that in mind, I wanted to highlight a recent rodent study that was looking at something that I think could be very much altered by these GLP-1 drugs, is our reward system. So that relates more to this pleasure and the pleasure that we have with eating that seems to be affected by these drugs is could there actually be alterations in reward systems in this sensation of pleasure as experienced in the brain? And so dopamine is a particular neurotransmitter that's often linked with motivated behavior and reward. And what has been shown is that this dopamine is released in reward centers of the brain when we're consuming palatable foods. And so when we eat something that tastes good, there's usually like a spike of dopamine. And in particular, this study adds to the literature in that they time locked and looked at, okay, what is happening with dopamine in reward centers of the brain of rodents in this case. And they found that upon consuming that palatable food, there was a spike, and it, remained sustained until they stopped eating. However, when they gave these rodents one of these GLP-1 drugs, they found that that dopamine response was blunted. So even if they ate a palatable food, they did not have that rise in dopamine. Now, with that, there is a caveat, is that over time, it seemed like the dopamine response came back when they were eating the palatable foods, but it does indicate that there could be some connections between this reward signaling that's happening in the brain that coincides with consumption of palatable foods. And so it's being altered or moderated in combination with these GLP-1 drugs.
Interesting. Wow, that's so fascinating. It makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to advance just for more commentary here. This is a framework that we have been using at Insights Now to really understand, and it's a framework that is a distillation of behavioral science, a way to think about, we talked about coffee as an example, the tensions that people must feel while they're on, and so this is something we call a habit flywheel. And the more a consumer, the more this flywheel goes around, the more embedded those habits. And when you take GLP-1, you basically switch off, you stop old habits from going around, and you create a new round of new habits. But it could create new tensions as well when people consider using different products. And so the reward system is so important, which you mentioned, in terms of understanding not only the experience, but it's also really important, I believe, in the relationships that consumers have with brands, the relationships we create, making the connection between a product experience and the brand that has a promise to help in some way. So as we develop here's my question, because if the reward is muted, what about the signals that people get that suggest that this is working? This is helping them achieve their goals. Could you create, could that create a dopamine effect, so to speak, or a different type of reward mechanism to help drive the behavioral change, drive into new sets of habits, maybe that we're seeing from this research? It's a question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point and a really good summary of some of the things I talked about. I do think that, and there was a question in the chat as well, how long did it take for the dopamine effect to come back? And it was really quick. It was actually only like a couple days. But I wanted to note that that was in rodents, and we don't necessarily know, how that's going to play out in humans. And looking at dopamine reward responses in humans, like specific dopamine release is a little bit more tricky. So the data isn't quite there from the human study side to really connect what is happening with these GLP-1 drugs and dopamine in humans. So it's still a
Right.
hypothesis right now, but
Right.
I do think what could be happening is with these GLP-1 drugs, we're reducing this food noise, as Sarah mentioned earlier, and it might be altering this balance between the hedonic food intake and the homeostatic intake, and like altering perceptions in relation to food intake. So it's really complicated, but I think that it's really fascinating and really important.
Yeah. Well, it the need is there for more research, and as a new professor at Oregon State University, with the unique blend of experiences and knowledge that you have, I hope someone on this call might give you a call and say, I'd like to fund some research into XYZ. I think it is really necessary. And so anyway, I encourage that. So before we go to the Q&A with our attendees here today, any final comments from each of you about these mechanisms, the science, as we're seeing, either from a consumer science, a behavioral science perspective, or more of the fundamentals here? I'll
Yeah,
start with you, Roberto. Yes,
yeah,
please.
thank you. Yeah, so I think it's key about this emotional connection and the dopamine, and I think it's important for us to understand where is the consumer going to find the joy, because the joy doesn't only come from the physical aspect of intake of food, but also of achievements. So they report,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of joy by achieving certain goals, and some of them even, start taking some activities and share with the families and be um, more social. So there's many layers in this joy. So food is just one part of it. I think these consumers have like a wide spectrum of new things they are, starting to know in their journey. So yeah, reward is important to know, but beyond the food intake.
Yeah, fascinating. Sarah.
Something that I'm curious to continue to track in this space is how these medications and now the compounded versions and other variants that are being introduced into our world are going to impact not just the users, but the people around them, and how we're viewing our bodies and what that means
Mm,
for the broader consumer space. So that's something that's been on my mind that I've been just kind of
Yeah.
tracking on the side, and I'm really curious
mm.
to see how it's going to impact food and beverage and in new kinds of innovation moving forward because of this shift in attitude that we're seeing.
Fantastic. Well, that's Anna, any final comments?
Yes, I actually do have a couple more things that I wanted to add. Is that also these GLP-1 drugs, we didn't really talk about this today so far, is that they also affect things like nausea and
Mm,
emesis. And one of the GLP-1 drugs that is out now, called tirzepatide, is actually not just a GLP-1 agonist, it's also a GIP agonist, which is another hormone
mm.
that is related to the control of food intake and insulin signaling, and that seems to be kind of altering this nausea response as well, so like preventing some of the nausea response. And so I would also be curious, for future research to be looking at the differences in perception that is seen with the different types of GLP-1 drugs, because the tirzepatide is the combination of GLP-1 and GIP, and the others are more GLP-1 agonists. So kind of looking at in that kind of detail, as well as I think it would be really interesting to see how behaviors change, as already mentioned a little, in after someone has stopped taking these medications, how are their perceptions changed? How is their behavior changed? But also over an extended period of time, and kind of being able to relate that with consumer behavior as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to thanks for those wrap up comments. I mean, so many questions still to be answered about the whys, but obviously this whole area is important to the industry. So let's get to some Q&A. Okay, so there's some questions that people have been posting, so I'm going to go back to one of the comments someone made, and that I thought was an interesting comment by Anapom. Okay, wondering if people are struggling with managing diabetes or weight could be segmented by themselves. So, there seems to be, and I think I don't know if it was related to my question, my research or not, but that's one question. Anybody have you know, what can we learn about, uh, the people that have these specific types of tensions in their lives before getting on a GLP-1?
So based on also the different research we have done, we identified like three main types of personas in this process, and one of them is definitely the ones that have chronic diseases, and they have they have to change their way of eating and the approach of their food intake because is vital for them. The other ones might be more aspirational in terms of
Mm-hmm.
losing weight, either to avoid health issues in the future or also to increase like self-esteem through through the process of losing weight. So, but yeah, definitely having diabetes is a major driver for a lot of people.
Yeah,
And that's how it became. Yeah.
yeah, the segmentation that you have done, and I admit I've seen a snapshot of it. You're doing a webinar coming up. Um, do you
Uh,
want to talk? Do you want to say anything? I'm giving you an
yeah.
opportunity for a plug because I think the stuff that you have been conducting, the research you've been doing, is really interesting.
Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to advertise. But yeah, we're gonna run a webinar on June 4th. I can drop later the link to the webinar. Is with
Please.
is IFF, and then we at the end we frame everything in bringing back the joy, to the people, because like we were talking in this discussion is more than the food intake, is the emotional part of it, and it's also the new relationship that people have with food and beverages. And hydration, like as Sarah was saying before, is super important as well for the consumer.
Yeah, fantastic. Good. All right. So there's a question. What is the difference between aspirational weight loss and self-esteem weight loss segments? Um, Roberto, it's got to
Yeah,
be a question for you because
no, no,
you've been delving into this question. I know.
yeah, absolutely. So there could be the motivations that we see is the aspirational could be because there are health issues that they try to avoid, right? That they try to avoid to become diabetic or having heart problems or different issues, but mainly around the health aspect. And self-esteem is more about how do you relate socially with the rest of the 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 people that surround you. And it could
Mm-hmm.
be either triggered by your immediate friends and family, or it could also be triggered by the work that you do and the way you need to perform, to that level. So that's something that we're going to be digging deeper in the webinar.
Yeah, different types of tensions.
Yeah,
Use
yeah,
that behavioral framework and different motivators for why somebody would decide to take a course of action on using GLPs in some ways. So it's very fascinating. Sarah or Anna, any commentary on this question?
I don't have too much, knowledge or I guess, expertise to really add related to it, but it's fascinating to think about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. Good. All right. Next question. This is from Kamlesh, and what should be the marketing strategy for food and manufacturing industry for the growing GLP-1 users? Okay, how should we, is a two-part question. How should we try to target and make their products appeal to this consumer group? Is it mostly clean label natural products? I see, Sarah, you're typing an answer.
Yeah, I
Can
was
you?
starting to type in answers. So there's so many different opportunities here in terms of marketing, depending on what you're able to do as far as changing your packaging. I know there's sometimes there can be a lot of barriers there, but some of the things that we've seen being received really well so far in the space is having smaller packaging options available. So even if it's a product that might typically be considered unhealthy, like let's just take Oreos, for example. Something that would be well received is like a snack pack version, or I think we can all remember, I'm sure these are still available, but when like the 100-calorie pack kind of products were released into the market, those are being received well because these consumers, like we saw, do still want some of those types of treats, but they just can't eat in the same quantity. So they want to enjoy some of the same or like a similar food product just in a smaller quantity. So that's
Yep.
been received well. And we've also really I know someone had mentioned it in the chat earlier, labeling of protein quantity. So if you have a product that does have protein in it, putting that right on the front, making that a big focal point has been received really well as well. We see a lot of companies innovating around fortifying protein in foods and snacks specifically. This is an audience that likes to snack a lot because they're eating smaller, more frequent meals. So like Quest Nutrition, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that company, but they've actually recently released a line of chips that are riffs off of like Doritos flavors that are protein fortified. And those have a lot of conversation amongst these users. So I'll stop there because I'm sure other members of the
Yeah.
panel have other thoughts as well.
Well, I want to, going back to this framework, if we can understand and segment consumers based on tensions they feel in different moments of their life while they're on a GLP-1 experience, that's really another way to get to marketing strategies to help this growing number of people are GLP-1 users. And I think more research needs to be done to delve into, where these opportunities are and to actually size these opportunities. Is the coffee industry, as in one example, one way in which I know, what about protein industry? What about the beverage industries and that we're seeing in terms of hydration, different types of moments and different types of tensions. People, it could be a sensory tension or it could be a need to, fortify, the fortification, so different types of tensions and consumers. And by looking at that, I think we have some opportunities to really understand the opportunities. Okay, so enough said on that. I want to go to the last question because we're running out of time here. Is what is your take on the dairy category in general? Saw yogurt and cheese mentioned. How about milk and butter?
Yeah, that's as you see for the silence is a really interesting question. I think we, for what I've spoken also with you guys, there's a lot of emphasis on intake of yogurt because of the protein and cheese. So because especially of cottage cheese is like one of the heroes as well. And people don't mention that much about milk. They do mention all the protein shakes, which may or may not be milk based. So that's one area. If it's any milk, I think there's some brands over there that are really doing a good job in terms of flavor milk, especially with added protein. And butter, I think, goes a little bit together with the fat reduction of people intake. It might be affected because we've seen people reporting less intake of fatty products, the pastries, ice cream and such.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So my question is, if one way to lose weight, of course, is to intake more fat and protein, right? Go utilize, that less carbs and so on. So you're utilizing that metabolic pathway to burn fat. And so so one of my question is that going to be something that people would seek out? But it sounds like there might be other reasons why milk and butter as dairy products could be more of an avoidance than something. Well, of course, milk has more fat in it, but butter per se is is much more about the oils and so on, the fats content. Any thoughts on that? Last parting comments?
I'll just say we saw the same exact thing that Roberto shared as far as dairy products. It was more related to the fat content. Some consumers were fine with it. Other people reported that they did have side effects, caused a lot of stomach upset, especially when it comes to like full fat milk, but they didn't have those problems as much when it came to the cheeses and the yogurts. And they were looking to those products as either snack foods or sources of protein. So dairy, we can't lump it all together. It is kind of separated out by each of the individual products.
Anna, any last commentary before we wrap up?
Well, I think that what has been shared about dairy foods is really interesting as well. And I would be curious if there's maybe something related to like more fermented, like dairy foods that have more fermentation involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Interesting.
Good question. Good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so next month, I would just we're going to be our June webinar. Will be on going back to the idea of rewards and emotions. How do emotions come into play to create memories and trigger reward mechanisms that create associations with the brand? Okay. That's that one set of the behavioral flywheel. So we're going to delve into that, both of the understanding of the mechanism of science, but also some really interesting research and about that can help those of working and understanding the connection between product design development and brand relationships. Okay, emotions are really a key part of it. So with that, you can click on this link and register right now, or send that around to others that you think with respect to your organization that would be interesting. So anyway, I want to say thank you to our fantastic panelists today. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Roberto, for a very engaging webinar. And thank you for all our attendees, which we had a good group of people, and very engaging, lots of good questions and comments. Okay.
Thanks,
and
Dave.
make sure you get your your chat for Roberto, and perhaps send Anna RFP for some research.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. Fantastic, everybody. Thank you for today. Bye.